Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you all. My name is Abi Alawale. I'm the founder of Unlearn. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which I am joining you today is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan people. I'd also like to acknowledge the enduring presence, traditional laws, knowledge, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples who we share this land today. We're joined by Aman Gurung, our marketing specialist, and we're also super excited to be sitting down with Nick Bertrand, someone who I not only see as a colleague, but as a friend. Nick, on behalf of Unlearn, I'd like to thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do in education through an Indigenous lived experience and perspective. I'd also like to thank you for taking the time today to sit down, connect with us, and speak with us. So for those that don't know you, Nick, could you please tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Well, first, Nyago Abi, for the chance to have a conversation here with you today. I would agree wholeheartedly that it's great that we get to be collegial in the work, but friends outside of all of this, which is it's a beautiful thing. And to your question about sharing a little bit about myself. I've prided myself in being an educator for over 15 years now, and that has given me many opportunities to do my own learning, but also to hear the stories of other folks who do the work of Indigenous education, and I suppose it's been through that I am able to share some of the things that I've learned through things like the module that we've created here together. I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, and I continue to be in the field of education today, doing that work specifically related to Indigenous education. And for the journey with Unlearn, in terms of how we've come to be together, it's been some time. I remember when I was working in the Halton District School Board, you and I had the chance to connect and meet when your first, I think it was early on when your first sort of poster pack had come out, and we saw these beautiful images that, were a provocation for such deeper thought. And, we were fortunate enough at the time, I worked with a colleague and Carrie Sager, who we were doing a lot of work around Indigenous education. And at the time, we were pulled into the work of equity and inclusive education as well. And we had the chance to meet you, and you graciously did some keynote speeches for us, educators in the Halton region. And what came from that was a lot of beautiful work with students and with educators, really getting into, what I just said, those beautiful unlearned designs that could be used as provocation for deeper thought, and a beautiful entryway into conversations that need to happen in schools and in classrooms and with kids. And like I say, that's, our journey together has been wonderful, but there's been many others where I feel like I've been blessed to, in this work. And I think what's important about all of this is that relationships is at the core of all the work that we do. I'm fortunate, again, to call you friend, and there are many others who I work alongside with, who they come to be like family, and we treat each other as family. And I've worked with beautiful and tremendously knowledgeable elders in my past, and continue to do that today. Family members, colleagues, acquaintances who've helped to guide me every single day in the work that I do. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is I'm really grateful to everyone who has given me a piece of themselves, shared with me, taught me, and who I've partnered with to do work on. And yeah, gratitude is what comes to mind when I think about those people and yourself.
Thank you for sharing, Nick. If I were to reflect on some gratitude myself, I think about when our paths did cross. I think of Carrie Sagar and the incredible work that you two were involved in, Halton District School Board, that you could have very easily thought, we got this. And you so openly invited me into that space. In fact, after that first meeting of me sharing the work of Unlearn, I don't know if you remember, you and Carrie pulled me aside and asked me, hey, can you do this for a few more people? And I said, sure. How many are you thinking? You're pretty vague about that number. You asked me to check my calendar, and I said it was free. It happened to be my birthday. And then you said, great, book that into your calendar. And by the way, you're going to be opening up a teacher conference for us. And, it's fairly new to this work and working with educators, and just how you created that space, recognizing that the sum of our work together can be powerful. And I so greatly appreciate that. And I'm grateful that, when I reached out to you to say, hey, Nick, I'd love to explore, working with you, and how we can continue that work that we began, and you so graciously accepted within a few moments of me even asking. So thank you for that.
Well, when your friends call you pick up the phone is number one, and number two, it's usually followed with a yes. So yeah, grateful for the opportunity as well. It's it's just it's an indicator of what we say, right? This is all about relationships and reciprocity too, right? Reciprocity is an important part of this, and if there's any little thing that I can do to help pay it back, if that's the right word to describe it, pay it back for all you've partnered with myself in, and Carrie as well, and what you've given to students and staff in the region where I used to work. Yeah, I'm all on board for that. And this is good work too. It's important work. So happy to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to hear, Nick, and about your backstory and how you started working with Unlearn. And it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today. One of the topics I really want to discuss with you is Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So this day was made to honor the lost children and survivors of residential schools, along with their families and their communities. And it is a step in the right direction in the reconciliation process for our country. But I wanted to ask you what can we do to ensure that this conversation around Indigenous education and history continues? So it's not just for September 30th, so it continues throughout the month, throughout the year, and through that change actually occurs.
Yeah, that's such a good question, right? I'm going to back it up just a little bit before I give an answer, and for some context. I think that day, that week, we saw activities recently for the education sector around, the day, but the week of truth and reconciliation just this past September. We know education is a really important part of this, right? So I think that's one key thing that we can be doing, is constantly educating ourselves, engaging in educational opportunities that are authentic in nature, to help us move forward. I think that's key. I remember when I was doing some work years ago, there was a fellow by the name of Kevin Reed from the Kingston area, and I remember him saying, Nick, reconciliation is going to happen one conversation at a time. And he said it's going to happen around kitchen tables and in the most unsuspecting spaces. And he said, in order to be involved in that conversation, you need to be educated. And I thought that was such an important wise words from him at the time, because I do believe it's not the big things. It's not the big, keynote speech that you go to hear. It's not that. It's the little things that when we do them, when we pick up that book, when we go to that community event, when we ally, and demonstrate our allyship and put privilege on the line when it's needed. Those are the things that to me are reconciliatory in nature, and we need those things to happen. So I think it's sometimes the little things, as I say, that are part of that reconciliation journey. But the other thing too is I think we need to, in order to move it past a day, we need to be really thinking about our commitments and what does a commitment mean. I oftentimes say to myself, I'm going to jog a lot more, and I might set myself the goal of getting up tomorrow morning and going for a jog. And I'll probably go do that. But you know where it gets challenging is after the first week of waking up and doing that, we get into the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth week. And I might fall off, and I might not continue to do that. And that's how I think about reconciliation too, is that we need to set goals, but we need to keep ourselves accountable to them. So I listened to some really wise words from the superintendent of Indigenous Education in the Waterloo District School Board around this day. And she had some really thoughtful advice. Krista Hill said, I would encourage people to mark on their calendars 6 months from today. And whatever it is they committed to on that day of National Truth and Reconciliation, they would check back in 6 months to see that they've done it and make a new goal and set a new target for 6 months out. And it's that kind of individual accountability that I think we need to find a way somehow within our collective self to embrace that. That to me is what's going to make it. It's not the one-offs, right? It's not the one-time thing. It's a true commitment to wanting to make that change. And again, it all starts with education, right? Where do I intersect with this? How can I be a part of this movement? But it's about accountability too, keeping ourselves accountable, because I don't know that we can depend on governments to do that. I think we need to depend on ourselves first. We can hold ourselves to account. And I think that's important. And, just to think about that whole day of national recognition, I know there's lots of conversation either way about it, and it is one of the calls to action within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's important. I think it's important to so many of us, because I don't want to paint any big, broad strokes here, but I think for many people, for many Indigenous people, one of the common things that we experience and that is part of our makeup is this collective feeling and collective reality of loss. And what I mean by that is that through the residential school system, through the colonial project that is Canada, our people have lost a lot, whether it's our languages, whether it's our ways of understanding the world and our knowledge systems that have been suppressed for some time and we haven't had access to, or whether it's like a complete disconnect from our communities because of all of those policies that have been put in place to assimilate and to hurt us. We all sort of walk, figuratively speaking, with this hole of identity. And I know that we're resilient people. I know that we're strong. I know that we will do everything we can because we've been doing it to survive and thrive as a people for a millennia. We're going to continue to do that. But any help that we can get to help fill that void, I think is important. And so if a national day spurs upon the possibility to help fill in some of those pieces alongside us, I think that's a good thing. And I hope that, again, it comes back to how do we keep the momentum going, and it's about self-accountability. And if that's the one thing I can impress upon people, that we transform this from being a week or a day event to something more meaningful, it comes down to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think just reflecting on those points you made, being able to hold yourself accountable on the little things throughout those months. Like, so it's not just one big event and then that's it. You know, it's the small things that we all can do to educate ourselves on the Indigenous experience and find out the little ways we can help, the little ways we can find out more about these stories. And I guess a follow-up question I have regarding that is, what are some ways we can continuously explore these truths, the truths of the Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, you know, first and foremost, I think that we have a tremendous body of Indigenous people who are pumping out absolutely incredible resources that do a few things. They certainly highlight and touch upon the very, very difficult truths that many might have explored in this, or will explore in this module. So we have that happening, but we also have, at the same time, authors that are putting out, Indigenous authors putting out, beautiful stories about who we are as a people, and stories that aren't necessarily about our traumas, but have connections to them, certainly, but are putting out stories that that share with the world who we are. And I think, that's one way that we can continue to explore truth, is by accessing the body of writers that we have, artists that are out there that are doing incredible work. All of those folks are that's within a click away, right? In many ways, in the world that we find ourselves in. I think accessing authentic voice is really important. So hearing those stories from the people who have experienced, whether it be, for example, a residential school survivor, or whether it's somebody from the community who maybe hasn't gone to residential school, but certainly has an understanding of intergenerational trauma. But so that's one kind of, one aspect of it, but, exploring our truths too about our knowledge system. So accessing communities in a good way, in a reciprocal way, to help continue the learning about who we are as a people. So similarly, what I just said about the beautiful writers and artists that we have, we have those folks who are knowledgeable and who can share about our collective traumas. Those are important truths. And we also have the same people and different people at the same time sharing our knowledge systems and showing and demonstrating our resiliency and our resurgence as a people. And so that's the ways that we can, continue to explore truth, I think, in a very tangible way, and look for those opportunities. They are going to be there in your community. Our people are generous, right? Our people welcome non-Indigenous people into their gatherings, because from the very beginning, right, our relationship was about this: peace, friendship, respect, and sharing, and mutual benefit. So, I mean, we like to live that, and so, yeah, look into your community. There's going to be opportunity there to continue to explore the truth, but also, continue to explore what it is, that Indigenous people house as part of who they are as individuals. Their collective worldview, their knowledges, the value systems, all those things. They're all there to access, and you just need to look for them. And that's maybe part of the accountability, right? You can set your clock by saying, I'm going to look into what's happening locally in my community, learn more about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so important to listen to these authentic voices, and we these authentic voices might be in our own backyard, in our own local communities. So it's so important to look out for them. A question regarding this I have is, why should we learn more about Indigenous peoples and their stories? I think it's an important question to ask because all of us are in this conversation of truth and reconciliation. But I think it's so important to understand what Indigenous communities have gone through and what they continue to go through, and understand why we should be understanding this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there's sort of two parts to that question that I'm thinking about. The first is in relation to the module itself that we created here. When I was kind of thinking up, looking at the beautiful unlearned designs and the creations that have been were made available as part of the module, I got thinking about, in my mind, like, it was at the time, it was right around when we first had this conversation, Abhi, you would remember, it was shortly thereafter we had the recovery of 215 beautiful children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And I talked to a few folks about about what had gone on since that time. What were the conversations that were happening in their regions? Friends of mine. And they kept coming back to, Nick, people just don't understand that, we've known about this for such a long time. We've known about these places, these very sacred places where we thought our people are, or we knew our people to be, from stories from survivors and community members. And they said, everybody that we've talked to was just so shocked by that. They were so shocked that this was a part of the Canadian narrative. And of course, the individuals who I were talking to, there was no shock when this came forward. It was more about a very difficult confirmation, right? That this had confirmed, and we do this all the time. We confirm what our elders and what our knowledge people have said. We do it all the time. And, more recently it was, for example, I think they found, they found archaeological evidence of existence here over 21,000 years ago, just recently, right, in the newspapers, right? And our people have talked about this through our creation stories all the time. We've been here for a millennia, but Western science is just catching up, we always say. But in those conversations with those folks, they said, they just can't believe this happened. And then, they said they couldn't believe that these other things were possible. And I said, like what? Well, they couldn't believe that some of the laws that were put in place in Canada would marginalize and oppress Indigenous people in such a purposeful way. They couldn't believe that. Or, they couldn't believe that, some of the things like we shared in the module around around the buffalo slaughter, like they couldn't believe that was a tool to bring people into treaty. Like all of these sort of hidden truths, right? That we have to explore these truths to understand, to understand two things. That this is the Canada that a lot of folks have no idea about. That's number one. But number two, we need to explore these truths so that we can understand what's actually happening today. And when we can make that linkage together of historical but current reality, that they're all linked together, then we say, there's a light bulb that goes on and says, oh, I understand now. I can see how that would be that way. And that's where we start to shift the thinking of people, is through the exposure of truth, is how I've seen it play out in the work that I've done. And we have to understand too that when we share these stories of truth, the second part that I wanted to share is that there's a reality that this is ongoing, right? So, we often think, residential schools and the 60s scoop happened, right? It was part of the past, and we're reconciling our way through that. But are we going to reconcile the fact that we've got more children and youth in care today than we did in the height of the residential school period, right? Are we going to reconcile the fact that we have communities who've been on boil water advisories for over 25 years? And it's not because of their own doing, it's because of the treaties and the agreements that have allowed these big companies to come in and totally ruin the land. These people never asked for that, right? Yet they're in these situations brought upon them by no actions of their own. And we have to understand that this is all playing out today. I always say it's the colonial project. It's the continuation of colonialism, right? This fact that we were removed from our lands by way of treaty, and that people came into our lands and started to develop them and exploit them. And here we find ourselves, it was one of my friends who said, Nick, we need to tell the truth that this is all connected to climate change as well. And it's absolutely true. Colonialism and climate change, we can draw connections directly to those. And that's why I chose that beautiful image from Unlearn of the globe with, the fallen trees and 99 cents, sort of thing at the cost for them, right? Like, we have to draw out these connections that the Indigenous current reality, one of the ways that we say that we need to kind of that we can move forward is with Indigenous knowledge. Yet we've spent so much, like, to save the environment, yet we've spent so much time and resources trying to remove Indigenous knowledge. And it's still happening today. We don't have Indigenous languages, as like an option for every Indigenous kid in education. That's a reality. Yet I'm of the belief that was taken away purposefully and methodically. And we need to find ways and the resources to put that back in place. That's reconciliation, right? It's the returning of what was lost. And not to mention, the other piece about truth, I guess the last component is that we need to understand the roots of the relationship in this country is through treaty. And treaty is law. And it's also part of Canada's constitutional laws as well. And that we need to be living up to treaty. And the only way I believe we can live up to treaty is if we understand what's gone wrong in our treaty relationships so that we can fix that to move forward in a good way. It's a super long answer, Aman, but it's, there's you've asked a pretty loaded question. There's, why do we need to continue to explore truth? There's a lot there.
I wanted to reflect on, you talk and unpack some truths, Nick, and in one that really resonated with me as I reflect on my experience as a settler here in Canada, being here for 40 plus years, reflecting on doing equity work for 20 plus years and how little I know about Indigenous experience and history. And one of the truths that you unpacked and helped stretch my mind and my thinking about is that oftentimes we'll reflect on Indigenous history and think of this is what happened to Indigenous people. And you very beautifully brought to light that this is not what happened. This is what is happening to Indigenous people. We've been honored and blessed to work with many educators across the province and beyond, and those that have gone to school and specialized in geography and history, and they're reflecting and humbly reflecting and openly sharing that, we didn't learn this in school. And, as I'm reflecting on this and I was ashamed for a number of years leading this work around equity and knowing and not knowing as much as I feel I should know, and recognizing that the system was designed for us not to know, and having to reflect on that and what does that mean, and moving forward, how do we reconcile that? Something that I want to ask you is, knowing what you know, and are you hopeful about the future? What is your hope? I know you and I have had some conversations about our families and our children, or your children. What is your hope for them? And as the more, I have to honestly say, the more time that I spend with you and I have conversations with you, I'm hopeful. But as more truths start to unfold and more we understand about what's happening, it's hard not to, as we take one step forward, we seem to be taking a couple steps back. My question is, how do you feel in these moments? And I'm guessing it would probably change. Are you hopeful? And what is your hope for your children?
When I think about hope, it gets me like a very emotional, right? Even just now, you talking about the word hope, it conjures up a lot of emotions. I'm thinking about how difficult it's been, for a long time, but specifically since May of this past year, how difficult it's been for communities to go through, these recoveries of their people, of their children, through finding these unmarked graves. And I think about how that's going to continue, for some time in our communities, and that's going to be hard, right? Part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, part of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, acknowledged that there would need to be healing services, provided to people through the very triggering and traumatizing telling of our truths, right? Of our stories, of individual stories as well. And so I think about that, and I get really worked up about it because I know it's going to be hard on people. It's going to be really hard on them. But I believe we need to find our people. We need to find the children, and they need to be laid to rest in a good way so that we can get some closure and move forward. And so when I step away from that, which is very hard to do in general, I'll be without hope. I wouldn't do any of this work. And I think I could speak for many of my close friends and colleagues as well, that, it's like a roller coaster, right? It's like up and down, up and down. There are times when we cannot believe that this rock we've been pushing up this mountain literally just took a little poke and now it rolls down the other side. And we have to stop. We have to celebrate that, because that's what fuels us up, right? That's what keeps us going collectively, is when we do see change, when we do see movement afoot. And we know that, like you say, that the downside of that is there's going to be, those low moments where you question what it is that you're doing, where you question, did I give enough? Did I work hard enough? When those decisions don't go your way, oh man, it's hard. It's hard. It's really hard. Here's what I say about hope, or about commitment. Commitment is that the only reason we're able to have a conversation about reconciliation is because those individuals who went through that system, went through the Indian residential school system, they're the ones who gave us the possibility to reconcile. They're the ones through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that gave us the hope for reconciliation. So I know it's maybe controversial, but when folks say that reconciliation is dead, I understand their pain. I understand why they would say that, because when things happen very counter to what they should be what should be happening, it feels like that, and I too will find myself in those moments. But then I realize, as a survivor, an elder told me it's over. Until they tell me it's over, I'm 100% committed to doing whatever it is that I can, because that is our generation's calling. We all stand on the shoulders of our elders and our ancestors who've come before us, and we need to carry their fight. We need to carry their fight forward, and that's the beautiful burden that we carry. It's a beautiful burden to carry. And so when I step back and I realize my commitment will be steadfast and be right there to listen to the elders and survivors, I can only be hopeful that whatever I do, it is going to create some type of change. And I think I would speak for my colleagues and friends doing the hard work of this. They would feel very similar too. I know for my own kids, I want them to be living in a place that is just, and I want them to be living in a place where all of those original agreements that we collectively committed to, where they live, where we actually embody and embrace and live them. And what I see happening in education gives me hope. When I walk in, I have a role where I'm able to be in different settings across different lands. And when I walk in and when I talk to children about the learning that they have, and it's like night and day from the conversation that you would have had, or that I would have had in school. And our kids are coming home and talking about these truths. Our kids are using just even simple language, like calling, our people Haudenosaunee, Gonyonkahaga people. Like they're coming home with knowledge. And it's not surface level. It's not just the language that they're using, right? They're understanding about human rights. They're understanding about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. They're understanding what it means to live in treaty. All of that gives me hope. You hate to place a burden on the next generation to make the change, but I firmly believe we're still planting those seeds of change with every conversation we have, be it around a coffee table or a dinner table. Every conversation that an educator might have in their classroom, they're planting those seeds of change. And I know I've seen concrete examples of how that helps to move people and move communities. And yeah, I will continue to be an optimist about this work, even though there are the absolute rock bottom moments when you think that, how could this happen? How could things get worse? We find a way to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and find our pathway forward again. And to me, the biggest motivator is, again, two ends of the spectrum. The fact that I'm motivated by the possibility of reconciliation that survivors gave us. And I'm also motivated by the fact that young people, anything that we can do to put this knowledge into their thoughts, to put this learning into their thoughts so that they can action change when they get into leadership positions, those are the two ends of the spectrum that I think I am committed to, and they give me hope.
Thank you for sharing. Like I said before, you give me hope. You give us hope. Every time that we have a chance to listen and learn from you, and you have been planting seeds, and you continue to do so. And just I'm reflecting on put a smile on my face. We talk about hope and our children's generation, and how just this morning, my youngest was reflecting on an educator having trouble with a land acknowledgement and pronouncing. And so he mentioned Haudenosaunee and just how beautifully, a young person can pick up that language and learn. And this is something that we didn't learn growing up. So that certainly gives us hope. Speaking of hope, I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about what is your hope that people will have when they engage with this e-course that you developed. expanding truth, expanding the truth before reconciliation, and what is your hope for that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to our previous questions, right? Which is, why is it important to explore? Why is it important to explore the truth? Because it's a linkage between what's happened and what's ongoing today, right? And the current realities that Indigenous people face. So, my hope, if I didn't communicate it well enough in the opening segment where I do a little introduction, this is meant to be a provocation for deeper learning, right? By no way, shape, or form could we collectively tell the complex history of this place in an hour and a half or a 90-minute module, what have you, right? So my hope is that folks take these truths as a provocation, because there's so many of them that are in there, especially when we think about that iceberg image. Take those provocations and do a little bit of your own learning. And maybe that's, again, to go back to on your question earlier, when we talk about accountability, maybe that's it. Maybe folks, if that's the first step that they take, they're going to commit to learning more about those truths. That's a pretty cool commitment, right? That's a pretty good place to start. Accessing those authentic sources too, where you'd find that information, and they're in there. The module has links in there to help folks through that. But yeah, my hope is that people will see this as a starting point, not an end point, and that they'll continue to learn. And from learning comes action. I'm fortunate where I get to teach with, in an AQ course where we work with other educators and qualifying them in First Nations Métis Inuit education. And I work with a beautiful elder by the name of Nancy Rowe, and Jody Williams is there as well, another wonderful colleague. And we often talk about, just having the language when this stuff comes up, when people know that what somebody's saying is wrong and hurtful and derogatory. Having the language, right, to equip ourselves with the skills and the knowledge to be able to say, I'm going to need to interrupt you, and here's why. What you're sharing right now is not true, and boom, 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 boom. Here's the reasons why. So I think, I think that it's a provocation for deeper learning. So my hope will be, keep going with it, keep doing your learning, and be an ally. Take that knowledge and find a way into allyship, and to interrupt. I think to interrupt what we know to be unjust and wrong. And those would be my hopes.
I mean, when we were reflecting on the course and you were sharing some reflections with me, there was a quote that particularly stood out for you. You wouldn't mind just sharing that, and if you had a question as well about that.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, as someone who is on a path to educate myself on Indigenous history and what's happened on this land, found the resources in this course super helpful. One of the quotes, I believe it was from Justice Murray Sinclair, was, "It is precisely because education was the primary tool of oppression of Aboriginal people and the miseducation of all Canadians that we have concluded that education holds the key to reconciliation." So I just wanted to ask you, what does this quote mean to you?
I think it's, I don't like to center myself in it, but I think it's validating for what it is I'm trying to do, and what many, many others, thousands of others, are trying to do through, sharing our stories is not easy. Doing this work is not easy. It's tiring, right? But I think collectively we know that it's almost a necessity that we share a bit of ourselves, but also more collectively we share the truth. That as hard as that is, we need to take care of each other. We need to find our circles of support to do that. But it's a necessary means as part of what is reconciliation. It's not just Indigenous people who need to do the work. We know it's everyone. But I think as part of it, we understand that what we can do to be a part of the educative process is really important. And so I think when I read that quote, it rings so true about the miseducation of all Canadians, 100%. What was going on in those schools was the removal of our essence as a people, or the attempted removal of our essence as a people. What was going on in not in those schools, but in regular schools, whatever we want to call regular at the time. I'm not sure what that would be. Other government-run schools that were not for Indigenous youth. There was every tokenistic, stereotypical thing that was being learned, and erasure and dismissal, right? Erasure of our true histories. So I'm very much of the belief that last comment, that anything we can do to really kind of pull that back, to help people to understand this is what's happened, give them the truth, and redress what has been in place before as the truths that we're taught. I do think it really is one of the keystones to reconciliation is education. And I think it's validating. It's validating for what it is that I do, and I use that quote specifically because I think it resonates around the shame pieces. It helps people to move through shame, to understand, it's not their fault. It was by design that you don't know these things. But I also say, now that you do know, we've got to move forward, right? So what's the commitment to move forward, and what's the accountability around that? And I think Justice Sinclair captured it best, and I couldn't say it any better. And I think those words mean a lot to me, and help to ground my work, help to ground my commitment to this. And
Yeah, for sure. That was incredibly powerful. I think to conclude, Avi, do you want me to?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question, and then we'll conclude if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Nick, 10% of every sale of this e-course will be donated to Geronimo's Dream Project. I was wondering if you'd take a moment to explain the importance of this project and why you recommended this initiative, and so for those looking to do their part to help.
Yeah, reconciliation needs to be about survivors too. I almost find that we want survivors to be at tables to help guide us through that. We ask so much of them to share their truth. But what do we do? In the grand scheme of reconciliation, what benefit is there directly to survivors? And that's a hard one to articulate. And I just think that anything that we can do to support things that are survivor-led, we should be all lining up to do that. And for the possibility of this particular module to support Geronimo's dream, really it started as a monument to honor all of the attendees of the Mush Hole, or the Mohawk Institute at Six Nations, just outside of Brantford. That was his vision, but it will turn into more than that, beyond a wall. And so, anything that's survivor-led, as I said, we should be looking to support, but also there is some other, meaning that I think goes along with it. Avi, you mentioned in your land acknowledgement that the territory that you're calling in from, and I know that's within that's within the Haldeman Tract, right, which is part of Six Nations, which is, the tract of land 6 miles either side of the Grand River that is the territory of Six Nations of the Grand River. And I think I always talk about supporting local, right? Supporting locally to the best of our ability. And knowing that Geronimo is from Six Nations, I think, knowing that myself, I'm a Haudenosaunee person, I think there's I think there's good meaning there as to why that particular survivor-led initiative is one thing that we can support. And the other thing I'll say about Geronimo is that he is so gracious. He works in the realm of education, and he shares his story. And he shared his story with thousands of educators. And I think, certainly there is the reciprocity in the moment where we might acknowledge survivors who do that type of work. But what's the lasting commitment that we can make as well? And in this regard, this is going beyond those. This is a bit of the reciprocity that I suppose we can give back to Geronimo, is to support what it is he wants to do there at Six Nations, and with respect to the Mohawk Institute and his experiences as a survivor, and what he's trying to do on behalf of other survivors. I think, again, the only reason we have the possibility is reconciliation is because of them. So we need to be doing what it is that we can to support them as well.
Thank you, Nick. Just as we conclude here, for those looking to expand their understanding of the historical and ongoing truths about settler colonialism, racism, and oppression in the country we now refer to as Canada, we highly recommend you enroll in this Expanding the Truth Before Reconciliation e-course developed by Nick Bertrand. You can do so by visiting learn.unlearn.com. It's roughly an hour in length and duration. If you consider some of the additional materials that Nick has suggested, you could delve into a longer time frame. As we mentioned, that 10% from every sale of this e-course will be donated to Geronimo's Dream Project. Nick, I'd like to, on behalf of our team, thank you again for making the time today to speak with us about Indigenous education, about your lived experience, your drive, your commitment to this work. We're also grateful to have you share your truths and knowledge to help us learn, unlearn, and grow in our Indigenous education understanding. Again, on behalf of our team, thank you.
Well, I'll go highest greetings, thanks and respects to you all. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you, brother.